Welcome!
Welcome to the omniverse of Nick and the finale to What If Bucky Became Captain America. Before we get into it, be sure to check out the Omniverse's homepage, where our channel mascot Omni will direct you to the Discord, both Google Docs, and everything else the Omniverse has to offer, along with smashing the like button, subscribing to the Omniverse of Nick, sharing the Omniverse around and turning on all Omniversal notifications, and commenting future requests and expectations in the comments section. With all that said, let's begin. We open up where we ended off last time, with Civil War going a lot different and the setup for Infinity War and Endgame, which will end this story of Bucky's Captain America journey. Now, we open up with Steve as a much different person. He no longer is Captain Hydra anymore. He's Captain Steve Rogers. And Bucky is still by the monicum of Captain America. And the entirety of the movie, past Civil War up to Infinity War, goes all the same. And Infinity War goes all the same, besides Bucky and Steve's roles being reversed until Thanos arrives on Earth and overpowers everybody. Bucky tries his hand, and he pretty much gets laid out just as easily as Steve, with Thanos being a little bit more surprised on Bucky's prowess than Steve's. Then Thanos gets the last stone by killing Vision, and Thor, with Stormbreaker, throws the axe into his stomach, but Thanos still snaps his fingers. Now, in canon, Bucky died, Cap was alive, or Steve, and we all know what happened from there. If I was to go that route in this story, it would almost end up the completely same way, except it's a slightly different Steve, and he would likely be, like, barely close to even being, like, able to wield Mjolnir, so it would almost end up worse. Kind of. Or, like I said, it would end up almost the exact same way, which is not a fitting end for this story. So what I'm going to do instead is, with Steve and Bucky's fate, like I have the entire story, we're going to twist it up. Steve, he gets snapped in this timeline. So basically, like, what if the other half got snapped? And Bucky, Thor, and Iron Man face down Thanos after their whole plan goes exactly as it did in canon, except Bucky fighting Steve or himself. Bucky would basically be fighting himself at the Avengers Tower instead of Steve, or, like, Steve versus Steve. You guys get what I mean. Anyways, it would all go the same, leading up to Bucky, Thor, and Iron Man facing down Thanos, with Tony being a little bit more problematic to work with, but they do it because they've come this far and made this plan and time travel, and like before, Tony forgave Steve and Bucky, so he would do the same here. It would be that kind of route. Like I said, the whole movie went exactly the same. And Bucky then wields for the first time Mjolnir. But even though he gets to land a few extra blows than Steve, it's still not enough to finish him off. But everybody still gets brought back, and Tony and Strange face each other down, and Strange holds up one finger to show it's one chance. But then Steve steps in the way of Tony and says, "I'll do it." And he says to Tony, "You forgave me for what I did, and you forgave everything. We've all had redemption arcs, but I never fully completed mine. I didn't deserve the forgiveness that I was dealt, and this is the ultimate way that I can symbolize my redemption for my best friend Bucky and for you. And that he should have died many of times over for what he did, and yet he's still here, He's going to go out on his terms by making up for everything that he's ever wronged and Peggy everything that he's ever done. And it goes to show if he became Captain America, they would never have come this far, and Thanos would have gotten his way. So much would have just ended worse. And he just faces down Thanos, looks at Tony and then Bucky and just everybody else and says, "This is my choice. I hope you understand." And with that, Steve uses the gauntlet instead of Tony, and he snaps. So the end of the movie goes exactly the same, except Steve replaces Iron Man, or Tony, so he's not. Tony is still alive. Falcon, Bucky, and everybody else mourn the loss of Steve. And Bucky, with his whole road as Captain America, he continues to be the Captain America, but eventually he realizes his time as Captain America, not only because of Steve, but because of his road as Captain America, how long it's been and everything he's done, he realizes it's come to an end. So he passes the torch to Falcon, and he says this is what Steve would have wanted, and he's had a great long road as Captain America, Bucky. So him and Falcon talk to each other, and Bucky says, "If you ever need a helping hand or shield, I'll be there for you." Just like me and Steve, we're by each other's sides, even through the worst of the worst. I'll be there for you if you ever need my help. And Bucky goes off with the Thunderbolts and pretty much all that stuff. Just random interactions with Falcon, and the timeline finally goes back to the way it was, except for Tony still being alive, and very minor differences. We get the timeline resurfacing to normal as Falcon gears up as Captain America and goes on his own journey against Red Hulk and to prove the lineage of Captain America, whether it is Steve Rogers or Bucky Barnes or Sam Wilson. It will always be a legacy for Captain America. So, we come to the end of another MCU story. So, besides the Sandman remake and the Doc Ock and the Venom and the Green Goblin stories, I have not touched upon an MCU story for quite some time. And I definitely had a great deal of fun making this one. Even though it really only affected the Captain America movies and Infinity War and Endgame, the message and meaning is true to Bucky, Captain America, Steve Rogers, Sam, and just the lineage and meaning for Captain America. Basically, Bucky becoming Cap means Steve would become the bad guy. Bucky became the bad guy when Steve became Captain. And it all comes full circle for Sam keeping the name true of Captain America to himself. So if one became one thing, the other friend would become the opposite. When you really look at it, that's the truest and most honest way that it can go. Now, in this timeline, it would be different because Tony Stark would be alive and would be a key factor and be involved with like Spider-Man No Way Home and the other Spider-Man films. He would likely be involved in the Doctor Strange movie or something. But considering the snap, I feel like Tony's death would come either somehow, someway in No Way Home or Multiverse of Madness, because the whole multiverse thing still happened. So it would either be a matter of time, or it would perfectly set him up for his own counterpart actor Robert Downey and Doctor Doom to cross paths Metal Man against Metal Man. Now, I could touch upon Tony Stark Iron Man versus Doctor Doom, since the MCU's most likely never going to do that, since we only have a few years left of the MCU. But I think it's more or less left alone just as it is, with not really any more changes left to speak of, other than the fact that Tony Stark is alive and can be killed or survive any way you guys want. Steve sacrifices himself another way. Instead of going to the dance, he basically snaps, and he does it that way. And Bucky hands over the mantle himself while still helping Sam. So, a much different Bucky, a different way of Steve going out, and Tony's fate being undecided. With all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this story of what if James Buchanan Barnes, aka Bucky, became Captain America instead of Steve Rogers. With that said, Amanda surviving in Saw is the next story, so stay tuned, hyped and packed, for more from the Omniverse of Nick.
Now get out!
What?
Get out! Everybody get out!